the distance, they could see a city's dim lights shining in the sky. It was then Carnage turned his attention back to Venom and mocked. It was then Venom shot back. It was then they resumed their fight.
Is every sentence gonna be, it was then?
It was then a loud noise caught both of their attention, stopping the fight. It was then they were able to see their rescuer. It was then she shook his hand next. It was then a loud, obnoxious voice broke into the room. It was then he changed to his Venom form. It was then she smiled and took her leave. It was then Eddie's words echoed in her head. It was then Eddie reached for her hand and gently grabbed it.
What?
It was then, 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 an evil smile formed on Carnage's face. It was then, it really hit home. It was then Olaf piped in.
It was then an ally of Spider-Man's activated the portal.
It was then Anna asked the question they were all thinking. It was then Elsa realized. It was then Eddie's next remark shook her from her
Everybody
thoughts.
take a drink every time it was then.
And that is when she finally sees something. It was then. It was then. It was then. It was then Eddie landed in front of her. That was when Serpentine began punching. That was when Serpentine did a running kick. That was when Carnage and Serpentine descended on him like a pack of rabid wolves. But that was when the enemy made their move.
That was when the fun started.
That was when Peter Parker, aka Spartacus. It was then the ultimate battle between For Arendelle and Queen Elsa began. That was when, I think that counts. Does this count as it was then? It was in that moment. The Snow Queen. It was then they found the chamber. That was when Venom threw the piece of stone. That was when the long overdue fight between these two finally continued. It was then Eddie Brock knew what he had to do. The symbiote had to go. It was then, ding, ding, ding. That was when Eddie Brock began feeling the cert. I was like, will we get one more before the story's over? And we did. It was then, it was then, ding. It was on that note. Does that count?
It's like a cousin.
I'm gonna say yes.
It was then. Man, this chapter starting to pick up here. Oh, that was when Venom stepped up to the plate. It was then a plan began to form in his head. That was when Venom jumped onto Tyrannus' back and began running toward the end of his tail. That was when Eddie and Elsa held each other again as they watched the other young couple in pleasure. For that was when he became Venom. It was then, man, you thought we weren't going to get any in this last chapter, but you were wrong. That was when Blair looked at the clock behind her and said, and they all lived happily ever after.